You are born into hierarchy and wet straw, where someone already owns your future. Being noble sounds impressive until you notice the house leaks and everyone is one failed harvest away from panic. Armor shines in songs, but in real life it arrives covered in blood and horse sweat. Nobody asks what you want. They hand you a stick and prepare you to become expensive violence. You learn quickly that honor is just obedience wearing polished language. Some people are born to work the land, others are born to ride over it, and everyone pretends this is natural. That blade is not a symbol of destiny. It is a bill your body will eventually have to pay. You do not know it yet, but your whole life is about to become discipline, debt, and carefully organized killing. Your education begins exactly as all romantic legends promise, with chores, humiliation, and other people shouting your name. Sword training is less about style and more about discovering how many ways the human body can ache before breakfast. You are taught courtesy because men who kill for status enjoy being handed wine politely first. Before you command a horse into battle, you learn to shovel what comes out of it, which is unexpectedly honest training for feudal society. Every mistake is fixed immediately, because battle is famously unforgiving and mentors enjoy participating in that tradition early. Religion teaches you humility, while the nobility teaches you that some humble people are apparently meant to stay under your boots. Hunting is excellent preparation for war if your main takeaway is that power enjoys chasing weaker things to exhaustion. This is when you understand armor does not make men heroic, it just makes their suffering louder and more expensive. By now, ambition and fear are indistinguishable, which is useful, because both keep you training. You are not becoming a hero. You are becoming useful to men who already think they are. Then comes the ceremony, the clean, beautiful moment where society officially blesses your conversion into mounted violence. You swear loyalty, service, courage, faith, all the required words people invented to make dying sound organized. For one brief second, it almost feels glorious, which is impressive considering how much of your future is about to involve mud. Then the poetry ends and logistics begin, because every dream eventually meets straps, weight, and horse temperament. You ride out feeling chosen, which is a common early symptom of not yet understanding war. Battle is not a tournament, it is confusion with property disputes attached. This is the moment songs are written about, mostly by men who are not currently being bounced around on half a ton of panicking animal. Impact erases fantasy immediately, because reality has always been faster than propaganda. Once you hit the ground, knighthood becomes very personal and much less decorative. Congratulations, you are finally a knight, which means you now get to spend years learning how ugly that title really is. Campaigning begins with a correction. War isn't charging heroically into history. It's traveling badly with armed landlords. You were taught to protect the realm, which in practice often means arriving hungry in somebody else's field. Nothing makes nobility look less divine than watching it try to sleep in rain. Strategy sounds impressive until you realize most plans depend on whether food, horses, and patience run out first. Then you learn one of feudal warfare's favorite traditions, destroying poor people's lives to make rich men negotiate faster. Songs call this pressure on the enemy. The peasants call it the end of winter reserves. Real combat is less elegant than heraldry suggests and much more interested in falling badly. You also discover that chivalry improves dramatically when the prisoner has money. War has an excellent talent for making cruelty look administrative. You wanted glory, but what you are mostly getting is organized ruin with a family crest. Eventually, the war stops moving and settles into a siege, which is what happens when two proud men decide thousands of others should wait in misery for the result. A siege is just architecture fueled by resentment. Knighthood loves to imagine itself as pure valor, yet somehow every campaign turns into angry construction. The enemy contributes by reminding everyone that gravity is still very committed to its job. This is where your expensive upbringing meets the deeply democratic nature of falling rocks. Once the wall opens, battle stops pretending to be noble and returns to its natural form, panic with iron in it. At this distance, heraldry matters less than balance. Victory enters a fortress the same way floodwater enters a house. loudly and with no concern for what was living there. You were told castles were symbols of order, which is true right until they are taken. You have now seen the inside of glory, and it looks suspiciously like theft with banners. After enough blood and mud, the survivors gather indoors and begin the sacred aristocratic ritual of lying attractively about what happened. Memory improves quickly once wine is served. This is the real battlefield outcome. Not justice, not honor, but a tidy redistribution of wealth among people already wearing spurs. You fought well, so naturally you are compensated with more responsibility and slightly better debt. Religion cleans the conscience the way water cleans boots, partially and with visible leftovers. The cost of noble conflict is always paid most completely by people who were not invited to the feast. This is when experience finally speaks honestly, just in time to be deeply inconvenient. Under the steel, you are discovering an awkward truth. Chivalry is mostly a costume worn over fear, ambition, and obligation. Everyone else hears triumph. You hear how thin the story has become. You are still climbing towards status, but the higher you go, the more the whole structure smells like polished violence. Then war puts on perfume and calls itself a tournament, because the nobility likes its violence with music and better tailoring. This is where reputation becomes a public sport, and men with too much status try to kill each other politely. For once the mud is arranged, the risks are applauded, and everybody agrees to pretend this is cleaner than battle. The crowd loves courage, especially when it is happening to someone else at high speed. Even sport becomes war the second your body reminds you that wood and bone negotiate poorly. Beneath all the ribbons and trumpets, it is still just trained men trying very hard not to get embarrassed in public. Here skill matters, but never as much as who is watching and what story they want to tell about you afterward. You leave the lists more admired than before, which is dangerous, because admiration is how feudal systems trick men into wanting more of this. Eventually, the pageantry ends and real war returns, larger and less interested in your personal legend. You have rank now, which mainly means more men can die because of your decisions. By this stage, war is feeding on land already chewed once, wasteful even by medieval standards. Aristocrats remain committed to settling egos before logistics, even while entire campaigns starve. Then everyone stops talking because history once again requires horses to solve an argument. A knightly charge looks magnificent from a distance and increasingly idiotic from inside it. Impact does what it always does. It strips away nobility first and leaves physics in charge. Once formation dies, knighthood becomes an expensive way to panic on foot. And here arrives a refined custom, not killing you because your ransom is worth more than your corpse. You entered battle chasing honor and ended it as a very well-armored invoice. Captivity teaches a wonderfully clarifying lesson. Your enemies may hate you, but your price interests them more. The code of honor functions remarkably well once money, lineage, and future negotiations are involved. Chivalry, like most elegant systems, becomes less elegant the lower you stand beneath it. Your survival is now a financial conversation, which is somehow both humiliating and reassuring. This is where the whole theater finally collapses. Politics sounding exactly like property law with sharper accessories. Loyalty is a beautiful word until someone has to pay for it. You come back alive, which is excellent, except for the part where your illusion stayed behind and died for free. Even reunion has paperwork attached when aristocracy is involved. By now, you understand the code. Honor is real enough to decorate speeches and flexible enough to survive almost any hypocrisy. You are still a knight, but now you know the truth. The armor protects the body much better than the myth protects the soul. Then comes the battle everyone calls historic, meaning thousands die for a dispute dressed as destiny. Religion enters right on schedule to reassure everyone that God has chosen multiple armed sides. You know the ritual: blessing, oath, banner, command, and then the usual collapse into screaming. Even at the edge of slaughter, the nobility remains devoted to making everything partly about rank. Battle begins the way order always begins here: loudly, confidently, with little chance of staying organized. From the saddle it feels glorious, which is useful, because reality is only seconds behind. Then the field does what fields do, turns plans into weather and pride into obstacles. This is the heart of noble warfare. Expensive equipment failing at intimate distances. Historians love decisive battles. The men inside them mostly experience noise with consequences. You are still alive. Evidence that God has paperwork left for you. After battle, rank survives. The noble gets bandaged, the peasant gets blessed, and both are told it meant something. Chivalry returns quickly once the valuable bodies are identified. The dead level everyone, but the living insist on categories while they can. Then, the aristocratic twist. Your own side has been losing honor in a sophisticated direction. Nobles turn any disaster into a meeting about precedence and wounded pride. The code cracks. Courage means little when strategy answers to vanity. Noble ideals are now limping, bleeding, and arguing over who failed more elegantly. Experience gives you the courage to ask, was any of this ever clean? The honest version, buried under polished language like a corpse under chapel stone. The system is perfect. Honor exists, but it never interferes with advantage. Once the mask falls, everything gets easier to read and much harder to respect. This is what prolonged noble conflict really produces. Not glory, but landscapes that look punished. Even sacred ground turns negotiable when armies get hungry enough, which they always do. Then comes the ugliest duty, using your training against whoever cannot stop you. Heroism is noticing exactly what kind of man the system wants you to be. You save a few lives, noble by human standards, irrelevant by feudal ones. Mercy always sounds admirable until it inconveniences authority. Knighthood is not a path to virtue. It is a structure that occasionally permits it and frequently punishes it. The war continues, driven by momentum, status, and men too proud to stop. You set out to be a knight and instead became a witness to how little honor power tolerates. Time does what no sword quite manages. It turns ferocity into maintenance and conviction into habit. You are still formidable, which is a flattering way of saying your damage has become functional. To them, you are proof that knighthood leads somewhere. Adorable if you ignore all evidence. Naturally, you pass the craft on, because every broken system asks its survivors to teach the next intake. Experience makes violence look graceful, which is one of its cruelest public relations victories. The body keeps a private archive even when the face remains disciplined. Peace, as always, turns out to be a short administrative pause between men with claims. Duty returns with the same confidence it always had, assuming your life is still available. Prayer no longer asks for glory, only endurance, far more realistic and less marketable. You have become what once intimidated you most. Not a hero, but a veteran system teaching other bodies how to last. Home survives, but it feels smaller than the story you used to tell yourself about it. Reunions are awkward when everyone expected a hero and got a tired weapon sitting at dinner. Noble peace turns out to be war with better furniture and fewer horses. Ruling well is harder than fighting badly. It should have been obvious, but rarely is. The order you defended for years begins to look like a habit backed by steel. They still hear the shine because they have not yet paid the price of seeing past it. Memory resists propaganda once it has smelled enough blood firsthand. Family honor feels less like an inheritance and more like a long chain of men handing over the same burden. You finally understand that power never really belonged to virtue here, only to continuity. You made it home with title, land, and survival. It's impressive, but it fixed nothing inside. Age arrives with all the subtlety of a tax collector, and for once even steel has nothing useful to say about it. The body begins renegotiating every old decision, and its terms are vindictive. Then comes the final insult: the world starts changing before your legend has finished aging. It turns out a peasant with range and organization can be deeply disrespectful to chivalric mythology. The title survives, of course, but the certainty underneath it begins to rot. You are no longer the future of warfare, just one of its expensive earlier drafts. Once this medal felt like identity, now it feels like evidence. Chivalry does not really die, it just becomes decorative enough to survive. The system outlives belief by adapting its language, which is a trick power has always admired in itself. You spent your life becoming the ideal knight, and now the age itself is politely informing you that ideal was temporary. Eventually, strength stops being your language, and the world begins translating you into memory whether you agreed to it or not. They still move like destiny owes them something, which is charming right up until the first real campaign. Experience gives you precision. Unfortunately, it arrives after your body has started filing for collapse. And there it is, the same question every generation asks before reality answers it in mud. You could tell him the truth, that war is hunger, fear, weather, and rich men dressing obligation as virtue. But systems survive because even their victims learn to speak gently on behalf of them. By now, prayer is less about salvation and more about trying to arrange a lifetime into something morally survivable. Death looks noble in sculpture because sculpture never had to watch a village burn. You are no longer living the knightly life, you are slowly being prepared for the myth of it. In the end, there is no final charge, no perfect speech, just a body that has finally run out of obedience. Religion arrives at the finish line as it always does, ready to tidy up what power and violence left behind. Everyone hopes dying men become wise on schedule, which is an exhausting expectation to place on failing lungs. Maybe you think of glory, maybe of horses, mud, screams, and men you never stopped carrying inside you. The equipment is ready for memory, already cleaner than the life that paid for it. And that is how it ends. Not as legend, but as silence with witnesses. Then comes the ritual, because aristocracy can process death only after arranging it properly. By now, the editing has already begun. The body disappears and the posture remains. The real man goes into the earth, the acceptable version stays above it in stone. You are dead now, which means society is finally free to admire you comfortably. Then, history performs its favorite trick, removing the smell, the fear, and the bookkeeping until violence becomes heritage. The legend improves with every retelling, mostly because the dead are terrible at issuing corrections. In this version, nobody limps, nobody starves, and nobody sets a peasant's winter on fire over a lord's inheritance problem. Reality remains present only in fragments, which myth politely sweeps behind the tapestry. And just like that, the trap resets, because romance recruits more efficiently than truth ever could. The person disappears first, then the doubts, then the suffering, and what remains is a costume called virtue. Every generation polishes the image further because polished memory is easier to inherit than honest memory. The system changes names, weapons, and paperwork, but power never really loses its taste for noble costumes. So, what were you in the end? Warrior, landlord, servant, or just another man trained to confuse duty with moral worth? You lived a whole life in armor, and the world repaid you by turning it into a beautiful lie.